Hey, welcome in, and thanks a lot for downloading this latest edition of Making the Leap. We so appreciate your support. We have hopefully some new listeners since we've last talked to you. We were just last week at a fundraiser event for Kansas City Christian, a K through 12 Christian school on the Kansas side of the state line where we live.
Right.
Prairie Village, Kansas. What a great night that was, and I want to thank that entire organization, Aubrey and Jake Hendershot, and that entire school. They were kind enough to invite you and me, and we not only emceed the evening and raised money, hopefully, I think something like $200,000.
I think it was close to $200,000.
But they asked us to come and MC, and you spoke a little bit about the foundation and the podcast, so hopefully some of those people are listening today.
It was a lot of fun,
them.
right? Because we finished, and there were people that came up, and they said, what was the name of that? What are we going to look up? And we were talking about Reed Lion. We were talking about just the different tool, like the school box options that exist. And I think it was really kind of fun to watch, like, eyes open wide on what exists here, and it's just across state lines. So
what did you learn from that evening? Because that was a unique thing. K through 12 school, they're busting at the seams. One thing they said, and it did my heart good to hear, that where they're having explosive growth are the very young, the kindergartners, the early elementary.
Yes.
That's where they said they're just busting at the
seams. And they
seams.
don't have the space to build. Basically, I was talking to the head of school a little bit at that dinner, and he was telling me that, as always, wherever you are, when you're building, you have zoning requirements and laws, things like that, and they're not able to build on the space that they have unless they go up, and even then that doesn't really allow for exactly what they need. So they were talking about how, it's such a heartbreaking thing, but they have let's call it 65 applicants for a space of maybe 50 for kindergarten. They're going to have to turn people away. They're going to have to turn kids away. And that's hard, because the other thing that I didn't really think about in that area, there are a lot of Catholic schools, but you have to be affiliated with that Catholic church or with a Catholic church to be going to those. So Kansas City Christian was one of the only non-denominational schools that exist in that area. So they're really feeling, I think, the pinch when it comes to wanting to bring in these families that want this kingdom education and don't necessarily have all the options in front of them.
So the show today is going to focus on something that has come up in previous shows, and we wanted to address. I think it's a great time to do it, and that is, we're seeing a lot of young people with their young children now looking toward Christian education or homeschool or whatever that looks like that's not traditional public school. But the but is, inside the family, there are oftentimes multi-generations. We're talking grandparents today, and we're talking about people from another generation who might be asking you, as a middle-aged person with young children that you're bringing up through school, maybe your parents are asking you, what you're doing what now? Why are you taking your kid out of school and putting them in a Christian school? That sounds crazy. You wouldn't think it, but often we have parents who see things differently than we do when we're raising our own children.
Absolutely. Well, one of the couples that we were sitting with that night is a set of grandparents to the woman that invited us there, and I had a delightful time talking with the two of them and learning, like, they're starting a grandparents club at their school. Like, that's the direction a lot of things are going, but true to what we're talking about, not everybody is just jumping on board with that. So I think it's going to be a good conversation.
First, though, before we do that, let me play for you today a clip of a kid you've probably seen if you follow conversations like Christine and I have here on this podcast, and this is a subject that's important to you. You've probably seen the testimony by now. I don't know, it's probably 3 weeks old by the time you hear or see this podcast. This is a kid called Brad Taylor, I believe is his name. He's what appears to be a junior or senior in high school in the, I think, Rochester, Minnesota area.
I believe so.
He's giving a 5-minute testimony before his school board as to why he's ultimately choosing to leave this school district. And it is as impressive a 5-minute monologue as you're going to hear from anybody.
Yes.
And so we wanted to start today's show before we get into our interview. And if you missed this for some reason, boy, turn this up. It'll make you stand and applaud this kid. Take a listen.
Hi, my name is Brad Taylor, and I just finished my freshman year at RHS. I've been a part of District 196 schools now for 10 years, and I'm going to give you a glimpse today of what's actually going on inside these schools. Despite the board's attempt to deny it, District 196 schools are quickly becoming a place where promoting activism is actually more important than promoting education. I'll take you back to my first day at RHS this fall. The principal came out and gave us a heartfelt speech about equality and standing together. He began to list countless races, such as Latino, Asian, expressing how much they matter and how important they are. But never once did he mention a race or identity that reflects me, or half the kids that were in the class. Now, members of the board, I know you haven't been to school in a while, and I know none of you, or most of you, don't have any kids left in the school district. But you must admit how uncomfortable it will be to be characterized just by your skin color on the first day of school and be thought that you were wrong just because of your skin color. So I will never forget the look one of my friends gave me from across the room as we were sitting there listening to this blatant bias being expressed in the so-called equity statement by the leader of our school. To be clear, I don't need you to tell me that I matter, but hearing the condolences given to other races and leaving just one race out, inevitably you'll start to feel like you've done something wrong. And in our principal's attempt to unify us, he instead created unwarranted boundaries and barriers between his students, pitting us against each other based on characteristics that we can't control. In another separate instance, I was told that writing "All Lives Matter" on the whiteboard was political and could be seen as offensive. When I questioned the teacher after class, she told me that she didn't have an answer and she just had to erase it, and it was quickly erased. There are political signs all over RHS, about specific races that matter, specific sexual orientations that matter, and specific perspectives that matter. But when I questioned the RHS administration about how these signs were political, they told me that they were supporting human rights. So when I questioned why the equity statement couldn't represent all students, they told me that to even ask that question was outlandish and offensive. And when I asked why that was, they told me, quote, "Whites have a pretty good situation right now," unquote. So is that not racism? Disregarding my question merely because of the color of my skin? To be honest, after enduring a year of the people in charge telling me that I'm a racist and I'm privileged and pointing out our irreversible differences, I've never noticed race more. And it's becoming the first thing I notice when I meet someone, which has never before been the case. RHS administration confidently told me that RHS students and staff are happy with their equity statement. But from my experience in talking with other students, this is not the case. I know many kids who disagree with their teachers, but they're too scared to stand up because they're worried that their grades will be docked and their learning experience will be affected. My honors government teacher, I'm not going to say his name, but he's mentioned that Democrats care more about all people while Republicans only care about themselves. And he's also inferred to us that socialism is better than democracy. He even had a statue of a socialist leader in his classroom. I've been told by a lot of kids that they just stay silent and adjust their schoolwork to reflect an acceptable opinion to secure a good grade. I've been approached by multiple teachers who have told me in private that they just want to say that they agree with me and they support me standing up, but they can't say it in front of the class for fear of being disciplined by the administration in some way or losing their jobs. There is clearly only one way to think in this district, and that is that they are teaching their kids to shut up if they don't agree. Now, members of the board, I want you to take a good look at yourselves in the mirror tonight and ask, are you really standing up for the equality of all people, or are you just pushing a damaging political ideology on our students? A fellow coworker at my job, who, by the way, is of color, discreetly told me that the school seemed to be pushing a very leftist agenda in class. This proved that not everyone is happy with your school, and not everyone who isn't happy is white. Now, due to all these instances I've mentioned and many more that I can't fit in this 5-minute speech, I have decided to leave this district and continue school on a private Christian school online. And there will be sacrifices, and I will not get to walk in the graduation ceremony or attend milestones at RHS, but I will be able to learn in an environment that is not intent on punishing me daily for my skin color and political views. Now, regardless of how you take my speech, whether you just shrug it off as malarkey or Fox News talking points, I encourage you to think about it, because someday I'm going to be a leader. I may be the president, a governor, or just a professional golfer, but I will never stop believing that everybody has value, no matter their skin color or personal beliefs, and it's a shame that you're not going to be able to say that I was an alumni of RHS in District 196. Thank you.
I mean, if there's ever a mic drop moment,
Yep.
would you not want to be at that school board meeting? I heard that when I was waiting for a picking up our daughter. A friend of mine had sent it to me, and she said, "You've got to listen to this." And so I pulled it up. I had not seen it, and I immediately started texting her. And my heart was pounding for some sadness, some frustration, some anger, but just wow, that, that kid's eyes are seeing clearly, and good for him for calling it out the way it needs to be
There
done.
are adults who couldn't do it, who don't see it,
Right.
by the way.
Right.
And that is going to be part of the conversation today. There are just some adults who don't understand how bad it's gotten. And we've talked in previous shows about how I've often wondered about the Brad Taylors of the world and boys our son's age who there's just no denying what they're seeing and experiencing. They're being steeped in this constant, perpetual attack on their character just simply because they're young white men.
And when he read that line, or when he said that line about, I am going to be a leader in the future, I was like, oh my gosh, I wanted to clap and cheer. He leaves what he knows.
I'm going to be a leader, and it's a shame you can't call me one of yours when I go lead.
When I go and graduate. I was like, good for you. And he picked up and he left. And we don't know his circumstances, his situation, but he left and he went to a Christian school where he did not have to feel the way he felt.
Did you hear the roaring applause when he said, I'm going to a private Christian school? Roaring
Maybe
applause.
not over my own cheering and clapping, but yes.
So I thought if you hadn't seen that or heard that by now, boy, that's an affirmation for all of us who believe in our hearts we're doing the right thing by our kids to redirect their steps in a new educational platform. Which brings us to today.
Which I'm so excited about. We have a guest coming on with us today who is a grandparent. She is a guardian for a daughter in an elementary age daughter in a Christian school. And so I'm really excited to have her on. Her name is Cathy Cole. Just to give some...
She's a grandma.
She is a grandma. She's a grandma. She actually had I think one of her kids, two of her kids go through the school. I want to talk to her more about that. And then had an opportunity where circumstances kind of occurred, and now she's got another one coming through. So she's older than us, with an elementary child going through the schools as a grandma and as the guardian. So it's kind of a unique situation. So I'm really excited to have her on with us.
Cathy, welcome into the show, first of all. We really are grateful for your time today. Hello.
Hello.
And as a grandmother, all due respect, I typically would not start with a lady and say, you're a grandma, but you're our guest grandmother today, and that's the whole point. The reason we had you on the show is because we really wanted to speak with someone who had a grandparent's eye. This is a subject that people have addressed before on our show as being, I won't say a problem, but sometimes an obstacle in families, multi-generational families. Grandparents of a certain age and era went through public school without incident, and then people our age here of middle age have gone through public school maybe without incident. Things have changed pretty radically, and a lot of people of certain generations don't understand how public school has changed. Have you had that conversation with people in your own demographic about what's changed in public school? You have. Explain, would you?
Mm-hmm. Well, our oldest son is 45, and we're now raising a granddaughter who is 7. And so a lot has changed. But I started seeing it change probably 15 years ago, pretty dramatically, in just changes in society and home life and different things going on, that kids were experiencing life differently than what we'd experienced growing up. And so what I think it's hard for my generation to realize is you cannot parent kids like we were parented.
Can you give an example of that? Would you mind giving, if you have one off the top of your head?
When my older children went to school, the oldest 3 all went to public school. Our 4th one did not.
Okay.
The older 3, you could take them to school. You could volunteer in the classroom. You got to know the teacher well. You had input, and you worked as a team.
Okay.
You felt like an ally to the teacher. And as time went on, our youngest son, he went through public school through 5th grade. And by 4th grade, I was told I could not volunteer in the school because by 4th grade, they are big kids. They don't need their parents there.
So the school was saying, in effect, we don't really need parental involvement here.
From 4th grade up.
4th grade
correct.
up. Wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Was that your first kind of eye-opening moment? Was that a moment for you to be told something like that?
No.
No.
We had a few other instances where we could see that things that parents and families weren't really seen as a unit in education.
And you're saying you noticed this, Cathy, you noticed this 30 years ago?
About 15 years ago.
15.
With her youngest.
Okay.
Yeah, with her youngest. Okay.
Mm-hmm. With our youngest. And so, it just was very frustrating. I'm a hands-on parent, but we're raising our 5th child, so I don't have time to helicopter. But it is nice to get to be in your child's classroom at least once a week and volunteer and go on field trips and things like that.
And so then did you end up moving your son at that 4th, 5th grade level? Did you end up switching?
Yes, we switched when he began 6th grade.
Okay. And you moved him to a Christian school?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And he ended up graduating from there. So
perfect. And so now you've got this a new one coming along. Your new, your 5th one coming through, and there's been obviously a gap in that. But and you chose to enroll this little one in Christian school as well. Then did you try public school?
Not for our 7-year-old. No.
Not for the 7-year-old. You went straight there. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So as you look back on raising grown children who are our age, you have a son that's my age, basically. What would you say about your son's public school experience versus where things stand today, and this 7-year-old that you're raising, and you've decided to put into a Christian school? You wouldn't enroll that child in a public school today, but your 45-year-old son, it was a different time. What made it different? What was it? Kind of what you said, the fact that you were allowed access to it, or was it curriculum, cultural, all of the above?
I think very much cultural. There was not a private school option where we lived when we raised our first 3 children. It wasn't even on my radar. And both of our mothers were teachers, public school teachers.
Okay.
And so we had a lot of faith in how a teacher would be felt called to do what they were doing, and many were. But our oldest son was extremely bright, and I continually found myself apologizing for the extra work he required of teachers because he was so bright.
Huh. Okay.
And so it wasn't a great fit for him, but we just didn't see any alternative. And so he went through, he went all the way through public school, and he found some activities that he enjoyed being a part of. And with him, it was kind of the opposite spectrum of our third one, who we were trying to get graduated, and graduated with a 2.7 because he was an athlete and could get by, and ended up with his MBA eventually. But, it's just, as most of us know that have raised multiple children, every child is different.
What an interesting thing. You noticed, though, about your son, who was academically very successful and very bright. Even all those many years ago, you recognized that the public school, for what it was, while fine, and you didn't have the cultural problems with it that we see today, even then you kind of instinctively knew this was not pushing your advanced son, your academically driven son. It wasn't pushing him as much as perhaps he could have been pushed in a different setting. Have I got that about right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I just remember saying to a teacher, I'm not going to apologize for the fact that he is so bright.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't apologize if I had a child that was struggling, and I'm not going to apologize that he's so bright. We just need to find solutions.
And that is, you hear about behavioral problems, but that's an entirely different problem. My son's too smart. I've never heard that. But you noticed decades, and I mean, this is.
But that's fair, because that's where I think as a teacher I would see, I knew if a kid was bored, they already knew the concept, they already knew what was happening. And then I still have this classroom full of, X amount of kids, and I have to do it. Sure. So of course it's a challenge. But that is part of, I think, what parents, I think now are sort of like, sorry, no, like this is, if we're sending our kid to you, these are needs that need to be met.
Right.
Well, that what I'm saying, I guess, is I'm discovering in this conversation is you're leading by example here. That this was always an issue. This is really actually not new, but to a lot of us who weren't paying close attention, this has been going on for decades, and not just for bad kids or troubled kids, but for kids that really could excel and do much more if pushed and had the right opportunity. Which is why, again, it's not a knock on public schools or public school teachers. It's just a one-size-fits-all approach to children cannot be the answer, and it wasn't the answer 30 years ago either. Right?
Yeah. They had a gifted program that he was able to attend, and he did well in that and loved it. But it was one day a week where he was bused to a different school, and he just needed that full time, I guess. But like I said, private school was not on our radar, and so we were just kind of plugging away, trying to stand up for what we knew he needed.
And so now with your youngest, with the granddaughter, with your youngest one that you have that is now in, obviously, I mean, this I guess sounds like kind of a, not the correct phrasing, but there are probably some unique challenges that you're facing. But I think I'm just going to ask, what are some of the unique challenges that you think you have with her enrolling as a grandparent, as a parent for her, that you encounter?
Well, I think because we've been so blessed to have our school community that we have, which she started at preschool age, we've had a pretty smooth transition in school.
Okay.
Teachers, and our youngest son did graduate from the same school.
Okay.
So I knew a lot of the teachers. I knew many of the families that were there. And she is embraced and certainly receiving a wonderful education, and she's so happy. A question was asked yesterday, what would you change in your school if you could change something? And she said, nothing, it's perfect.
Oh, wow.
I love it. I love it.
She's very happy there. Yeah.
Do you
she's
see
very happy.
Do you see a lot of other grandparents around you getting involved in the school itself?
Yeah, a few. I wouldn't say a lot.
Okay.
But there are several others that, provide maybe childcare for their grandchildren, so they're involved and that sort of thing. I don't think there's any other families in our particular situation. But, as in any setting, when children are being spoken to, especially in large groups, the speaker will refer to your mom and dad. And so, that's always a little tricky for us.
Sure. Because
our situation's unique. But, I've just really appreciated the sensitivity that has come with our situation and where we are now. And that was one of the things we felt like, I don't have a lot of 30-somethings wanting to run and have coffee with me at drop-off,
That's hard. It is. It's hard. That is one thing, especially when it's your youngest. My friends and I will talk about that too. I have a friend with a kindergartner, and she said, it's very different. It's very different now than it was when we started.
But because of the environment, everyone's very sweet and inclusive and respectful. So that's another big bonus to me of having a little different culture and
sure.
all being like-minded.
I remember coming up in public school every year. They had Grandparents' Day. Do Christian schools have Grandparents' Day? I guess.
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Coming up in about 2 weeks.
I was just going to say, I did help with that last year, and I was stunned at the amount of grandparents that were there. And I thought, wow, if there is a way to tap into a resource for the schools itself, I mean, I can't think of a better pool of a resource for those kids than those grandparents.
So let's be honest here, Cathy, because this is what we do on the show. We're Christine and I usually use our own personal lives as jumping off points, and we'll ask a little advice from you. I'll speak on behalf of my own parents. I think that my mother was a public school teacher all her life, and proudly so. I think that my parents, if they were to be completely honest, and if I hooked them up to a lie detector, I think they'd be honest and say they're not entirely sure that Christine and I have made the right decision or that we're doing right by our daughter Anna by putting her in a private Christian school. Not because they're not Christians, but because they think that's so antithetical and kind of uncomfortable and unusual to them. And how's she going to fare? And is she going to have the same socialization? And does she have the same opportunities? And have you guys kind of got nuts? You know, just because I think my parents are of a different era. Does that make sense?
Well,
and what would you say?
Yes. And, you know, when we first started pursuing the idea of a Christian school, you know, in my mind, it was like, oh, this would be perfect. Everybody'd be Christians and there wouldn't be any of the problems so on and so forth. But what we came to find out is that the real blessing was living life's problems with like-minded people. So it's not a bubble. The school's not a bubble.
Right.
And there's a lot of human beings there. So we have a lot of the same issues, you know, that other schools have. But, okay, my granddaughter and her best friend had a problem. And they weren't getting along for a couple of days and were saying words to each other that were kind of mean. I walked into chapel, and the best friend's mother walked in with me, and we discussed what was going on. We sat where the girls had to sit together, and we talked about it. And everything was almost instantly okay.
Wow.
And that has been my experience also with our son, is that because you're like-minded, because, you know, you're making a sacrifice to hopefully have your child in a setting and a situation where they make good decisions and have opportunities to discuss that with adults and be supported in that. That's, to me, one of the big benefits is things aren't always rosy, but in our situation, when we've sat down with other parents, we've always been able to iron it out.
How important two guardians approaching a problem with a shared set of values as opposed to locking horns instantly, having absolutely no commonality between them. You wouldn't even find that kind of reciprocity in maybe a different setting, but because you both are invested in the same environment with the same goals and objectives.
Right.
That makes total sense to me, but boy, that's tough to achieve if you're not in a setting like yours, right?
Well, yeah, because that was one of the hard things. One of our sons, when he was going to public school, a boy on the bus started picking on him, and it turned into a fight, and our son's head went through the window of the bus.
Gosh.
Broke his glasses, and we had to pay for the window because our son's head broke it.
Good grief.
Isn't that insane?
And I bet there was no sit down with the parents either, was there?
We tried, but the other parents would not come in.
Wow.
So because the other parents wouldn't come in and talk to us, their only solution was to have us pay for the window.
Wow. It's amazing.
And so, you know, it's a very extreme difference in handling conflict.
What would you say to somebody that's kind of like what Chris was describing, you know, if we have, you know, just kind of that, like, I don't know what you're doing, what advice or what, what, I don't know if you have like not a platitude, but what advice would you give, or what suggestion or thought would you offer to just say, you know what, this is why we're doing what we're doing? What would you say to that grandparent? Because I really do think there's a lot of pushback that comes when your couple is about to decide something big for their kid, and it's gonna look different. Because I think sometimes grandparents, they're operating from the same place as parents, where they have these preconceived plans and ideas and thoughts about how it's going to look in school for their kid, and now all of a sudden it's going to be different. It's going to change. What would you say?
Well, change is the only thing we all have in common.
It's true.
So, yes, there will be differences, but where our children have gone to school, it's a fully accredited school. We play sports with public schools. We participate in art contests and music contests, and just like any public school. There are many things that are very similar. But for me, the strongest thing is having access to teachers, administrators, other parents, being welcomed in the school, even through going back to school in 2021. They were very cautious about who came in and volunteered, because obviously we were all learning and on a learning curve.
Sure.
But I have never felt like I was not welcome there. And, if you really want to be an active part of your child's life and don't want to just drop off and pick up, it's a totally different culture there.
That's true. I guess that would be part of it, right? Like pop in to see the culture, to understand what it is that is trying to be achieved there. That's a really great point.
Well, Cathy, I've learned one thing in our conversation. You've given me pause for this thought, and that is the next more mature person that I see at the kids' school with another younger child, I'll ask him or her to coffee.
There you go.
I really appreciate your time today. It really is, he's not wrong. Like, that is something where I think all of us maybe on occasion need to kind of get out of our own way a little bit and just understand that, like you said, we're all in this for the same reason, whether we're 45 or 65 or 35. That is the big piece. Cathy, thank you again so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
You're so welcome.
What a sweet lady, and what a reminder it is that this conversation about school, private education, Christian education, it's not new, actually.
Right.
It's just that, again, I count myself as someone who just never really paid attention to what was always right in front of our face. When I think about let's talk about negatives. What about the kids that really excel and could use so much more? And it's just a function of the space called public school that just can't maybe quite provide it.
Right.
And I remember those kids too. I mean, again, we always talk about kids that have needs. What about the kids that have very positive?
Right. It's a different kind of need. Right.
But that's always been a thing, and always kind of fundamentally, systemically the problem with the model.
Well, and especially when you look at it from a kingdom education point of view, because every single one of our kids, no matter where they fall within their academic career, they are created by God. They are, we need as parents to make sure we're providing opportunities and finding opportunities to help meet those needs, no matter what those may be. I wrote it down because I wanted to remember it when she said, the school itself is not a bubble, and I know you and I see that all the time. But when she said, you're living life's problems with like-minded people, what a testament to what really I think kingdom education itself is. That idea that we are all here for God's purpose, looking, focused on our salvation at the end of the day. And if you can come along in community with other people, that I think is one of the best benefits. Yeah, I mean, being able to call up a school and a parent, or not even call up the school. I mean, if I heard her story right, she just went right to the parent in the school during school time. Right. And having that opportunity to build those relationships and those connections, I think, is afforded when you're in a place where you have some baseline expectations, but it's maybe a little bit smaller. Yep. People always worry about the size, but I think that is part of it.
Well, this is what I think people thought of public schools. Mm-hmm. You know, I think about movies like The Christmas Story, you know, the kids going to the school and then the teacher knew who all the students were and the parents knew who the teacher was and everybody was accountable to everyone. Mm-hmm. That is what we used to think of as school, but that's changed dramatically, obviously.
And I'm glad that she referenced some of those teachers too, just talking about, you know, that her daughter, you know, wouldn't change a thing. Her granddaughter wouldn't change anything. Yeah. And I bless it for those teachers, which I wanted to make sure that we mentioned because part of this podcast being sponsored by Herzog is that we have access to just the different information, the different programs that are going on. And so I wanted to mention the nominations that are still being accepted for the Excellence in Education, Excellence in Christian Education Awards. So I believe the deadline is March 10th, which is coming up soon. If you are listening to this, you have a child in a Christian school, it does need to be a Christian school. The teacher, if you want to nominate a teacher, I think does need to have been teaching for a year already and have plans to continue on. All the information is online, but if you go online and search up Herzog Foundation, it is there. And I just wanted to encourage people to think about that. It was such an incredible event last year.
This is a nomination for Teacher of the Year, Christian
Teacher of the Year. Yep, Excellence in Education Awards. So that they're accepting nominations from all over. I know last year they had in the hundreds in terms of applicants.
From all over the country.
All over. And so when we got together in DC for the actual awards, that was so fun to watch people coming together from all over the place. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that because that is something that is one of the neat features of the Herzog Foundation and what they are trying to do for the advancement of Christian education.
So, get those nominations in. And meanwhile, if you're listening today and you're so inclined, hope you will, give this a 5-star review and a written review at Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That's always appreciated. When you give a review, a written or a 5-star review, it means a lot. Always share it, pass it along. You can follow along on social media and send us notes of either comments. We've had some great comments lately on, particularly a couple of weeks ago, we had the young lady, Maddie.
Yes.
A lot of you have responded to her. She was a bright light. It's good to hear from young people doing great things.
I had one that reached out, a listener messaged me, found me and said, oh my goodness, I'm even more glad that I have my child where I have my child because there are role models like that are in existence. And I thought that is a real testament to what can happen in these communities.
So stay in touch with us and let us know what you're thinking, what you're hearing. And thanks for downloading this edition of Making the Leap.
Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. Please rate and comment on the show, as well as subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we'll see you next time on Making the Leap.